to the Kelly Writers House. This might be our first lunch program of the year. Has anybody been to one before this one? Oh, so it's the second one? I can't believe it. We're getting into it. Well, that's right. We had Russian poets here. We had Russian poets. That's right. This is the second official program. Well, this program, I have to say, within an hour of announcing it, it was full. We had an incredible turnout. There's a chair here, chair here, chair there. Come on in. I'm gonna keep talking a little bit to allow people to come on in. So within an hour of announcing this program, we filled this room. I think for two reasons. One, there's a real hunger among people to hear about how to get into the publishing industry, how to get into children's literature in particular, how to be an author, how to think about how to put a book together, or how to be a publisher. I mean, I know it's not necessarily a straightforward career shot from here to there. So people are interested in hearing how people did it, what happened, how they get there, what's the advice. And people are interested in the field in a more abstract way. What's happening to books? How are things getting published? How do people make these decisions? But I think the other reason this program filled up immediately is these two people right here. This is an incredible team to have us, to lead us in a discussion like this. Donna Jo here. Donna Jo Napoli is teaching here at Penn this semester, right in the Writers' House. She's really filling a need that students have expressed for hearing about how children's writing happens, how it works, what the story is, because it's not a simple story, right? Children's books seem so easy, they're readable. It's not a simple story. So it deserves a full-on Penn class. We need that happening. And so we're really lucky. We are really lucky that Donna Jo is doing this. We're super lucky.
How much have you written, Donna Jo?
Hopefully you'll tell us.
She's so modest. Okay.
She'll tell us a little bit about her own career history so that this program can have more depth to it. And then, of course, the announcement that we send out really featured Wendy Lamb, who she's going to vamp a little bit for you. As you know from the announcement, she is the publishing director of Wendy Lamb Books. Wendy Lamb is the director of Wendy Lamb Books. Somehow. So, and that's part of Random House. So everybody knows Random House. So this is just on a straightforward CV level, big deal. But also, if you look at the biography we sent out, all of the awards have been associated with books that she's ushered into print. She's thoughtful and careful. She knows what she's doing.
Well, it's actually a really humbling job. You don't always know what you're doing because talent is so unpredictable.
That's exciting. I mean, and I think that's actually good news probably for everybody in this room. So I'm going to turn it over to these two to run this event. I know there will be time for questions, and we have a cordless mic that will float around. We are replacing the batteries, so it'll be coming around.
Will you tell us when we should finish so that we leave room? Okay.
Absolutely.
Somebody
Yeah. We'll have either me or somebody will stand in the back and give you a signal maybe at 12:30. Does that seem like enough time for questions?
Yeah, Q&A is often the most interesting part, right? More happens in the Q&A. Yeah, okay.
All right, without further ado, let's give a big, warm Writers' House welcome to these folks here.
Thank you. Wendy and I were talking a little bit about how to get started, and since children's writing is often things that everybody and their aunt thinks that they can do. And so when people find out that I write children's books, they say to me things like, oh, that must be so much fun.
Isn't that nice?
As though there's no work involved. But when you ask yourself, how many books have you read more than 5 times? They're all children's books. And how many books have you read more than 100? You know, you read some of those children's books over and over and over again. And if you get a group of people together and they're Americans, and you ask how many of you read this book and this book and this book, the books that everybody in the room has read are the ones that are children's books. They really do, I think, form our common culture across race and religion and economic class and so many things. So I was wondering if you would like to give us your view kind of children's literature and how it fits, because you're in the middle of Random House, which covers everything. And
You mean fits our culture?
yeah, or the business that you're in, or anything that you want to.
Well, children's books, okay, I'll just, children's books is just an odd duck if you think about it, because it's, if my colleagues on the adult side of Random House, they can go out in the hall and find their reader. They can go to their colleague and say, what do you think of this idea for a book? Or do you like this page? Whereas children's books are done, I mean, it's all a bunch of adults sitting in an office trying to think like an 8-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 14-year-old. It's a very odd business. And our first consumer, when we're selling to what we call the gatekeepers. We don't reach our intended audience directly until we get to young adult. Then you can get a kid who goes into a bookstore and buys a paperback with their own money. They choose the book themselves directly. But younger readers really don't choose their own books when you think about it. It's chosen by an adult, or it's in the library collection, so then again it was still chosen by an adult. Or a teacher has it in class. Again, so it's just a really odd quirk of our business that it's got these people, adults in the way, and that we're adults. And over the years, when I first came to work at Harper, my first little job, and children's books, which is kind of like starting out at Harvard and not knowing you're at Harvard. My first, because it is an amazing place to learn about, to start to be a publisher, because they're the ones who publish Charlotte's Web, Where the Wild Things Are, Little House on the Prairie, just so many books, Goodnight Moon. I mean, my God, I didn't realize exactly where I'd ended up, when I got that job. But I remember being really struck by how many people there didn't have kids. And I thought, we'd all be sitting there loving children. Well, that's not literally the case. Plenty of people start writing for kids because they have their own children and that inspires them. And that often happens. Or they're teachers, they love children, so they teach. And then being a teacher makes them think of stories. So it does come to some people who gravitate toward children in the first place. But a lot of the great talents, it's really, I figure, it's about people who are close to childhood. It's not literally about children themselves, it's about something in themselves. And you think of some of the great talents like Sendak. He was not known to be, Mr. surrounded by toddlers, right? He's sort of famously cranky. And so many of the great talents didn't have kids in their lives at all. They were drawing on something else. And that's a quirk of the business, which I find very interesting. And the challenge, and why some of us end up as editors in it is fascinating, and it's odd talent. I don't know why some people have it, but for some reason, some of us are sensitive to standing in for the 8-year-old or the 10-year-old or the 15-year-old. We somehow have a sense of how they would feel about your story. And it's also interesting about being an editor, because it's taken me a while. I was a writer in college. I was creative writing, and I went to the Iowa Writers Workshop and that kind of thing. But I always was editing. That was my marketable skill instead of waitressing. It's what I had to pay the bills. Like, most people trying to do art have to have some job. And in a crazy way, I never left it, but it turned out to be kind of a blessing, because I gradually found I really wasn't driven to tell a certain story, to be, a novel. And you have to be driven to be a writer. You have to absolutely be driven. And if you're not, don't torment yourself about trying to be a writer anymore. I mean, honestly, I'm begging you, because you'll be happier than sort of feeling like I want to write, but then you never do it, which is very common. Don't worry about that. You have to be driven to do it, to isolate yourself from others and go away in a corner. And the interesting thing I finally figured out was some talents are generative talents and some are reactive talents. And it's like being the director of a play. It's kind of a reactive talent. And there's all kinds of talent in the world, but that helps an editor to be reactive. I find that really interesting about it. Maybe over time you'll figure out, you think you have a certain kind of talent now, but you may find you have a different kind of talent over time. And it's just interesting. And one thing I always want to say to people in general is, this is not about being an editor specifically, but when I go to writers' conferences, I'm always aware that people, trying to publish or trying to write a certain thing, and maybe they can't succeed, quote unquote succeed, by publishing it. And I just want to urge that, that's a very narrow target to hit. And I don't like people to abuse their creativity with these narrow goals that may make them feel like failures. And also, failure is not bad. It's an organic part of any art form. And I always love this quote by Winston Churchill. He said, success is just going from failure to failure without losing your enthusiasm. And so I just urge you to keep in mind, treasure your creativity, because you need it to get you through so many parts of life. It's not just about writing something and publishing it, and you may find your creativity will take you in another direction entirely from that path. And just always take care of it. Okay.
I'm wondering, when you talk about the experience of you can't just go out in the hall and ask somebody, what do you think of this? Do you feel that as an editor for children's work, you have a different responsibility from an editor for adults?
Yeah, definitely. I always feel that a children's book, sometimes the adult department will send me a book that's got a great young character in it, and they'll say, could this be YA too? Could we publish in both zones? Is this YA? Is this adult? And that's an interesting question to think of, why is this YA or not? And one criteria is a book for younger readers should have some kind of hopeful feeling at the end. If it's totally grim, to me that's not a book for younger readers. I don't want to publish a book like that. And I also don't want a false ending either, a false hope. So that's a real goal in any book we do, is to earn, the emotional satisfaction of the ending and earn the hopeful feeling in some way. One of the big interesting things about younger books, middle grade is 8 to 12, YA is supposedly, young adult is 12 to 18, but how do you define adolescence? It's a variable thing. It didn't even exist until the 40s, because it's really, adolescence is a stage given to you by an affluent culture, because once upon a time there was no such thing because you went to work. It's when you go to work is when technically you're an adult, right? And it has become more and more an extended growth to get to that, autonomy as an adult. And some people never have an adolescence, and some people never leave it. So that's an interesting thing of doing these books, because who's our reader? It's a really broad readership. But one distinction between middle grade is you can have more open endings in YA. You don't have to tie up so much, that's because it's more lifelike, right? So much is never clear. But for younger readers, you do have to shape it more, and you do have to answer the key questions in the story. Whereas I think the older you are as a reader, the more tolerance you're going to have for some questions that never get answered. Because, it's just, and that's another challenge of our job is, unlike the adult side, our reader is growing and changing emotionally and in terms of literacy at every minute. And it's also very hard to pinpoint, talking about responsibility. When is a child right for this book or that book? What is the right book for this child or that child? This is an endless conversation and debate in our field. And do we have to be careful in what we do? Yes, we have a responsibility, because there's always this discussion of, if you put something in a book, will a kid go out and do it? Or if you introduce them to some, sexual behavior or bad behavior of some kind, are you influencing them and holding up a model for them to follow? Well, we don't feel that as publishers. I mean, yes, I think if you are really irresponsible and you have a kid who spends the whole book figuring out how to blow up the house, and you write about how to do it, or electrocute the dog or something hellish, no, I wouldn't want to publish a book like that, no. But, or, that encourages you to jump off the roof, with wings. But there's plenty of ways you can have a character who's making what we call poor decisions about their life and what they're doing in high school or something, doesn't mean that the reader's going to go and do it. I mean, that is just so literal that people think that. But we have ongoing conflict and discussions about this all over the country. And you can imagine in very conservative parts of the country, there is like tons of censorship and, parents, asking school boards to remove books from the collection. And lots of conflict. And it's always so interesting to, we work very closely with British publishers, and also all of us have British parts of our companies now. And they're always just amazed at what goes on over here, with a book. Like, they can publish the same book that we do, and then we run into all this hullabaloo censorship challenges in, like, Texas. And they're like, what? And it's very hard to explain. Or, religious. I mean, I just published a lovely middle grade where there's a girl, her little brother doesn't speak, and they move to a house where the girl has dreams about the past, and there's a child in the past who doesn't speak, and she finds a way through a dream to go into the past and enter it because she's trying to help her brother in the present. And it's a very interesting book called Listening to Luca. And there's this review on Amazon from Christians objecting to the demon possession. I know. And it's just like, who knows? That happens all the time for us. See, people don't do this for adult books. They just let an adult book go out there and be, risky material. Nobody feels challenged or vulnerable to it, but they feel that children need to be protected. And, this happens in everybody's family, too. These discussions, your parents disagree when you're ready for X, Y, or Z. So that is ongoing, and that's something my adult counterparts on the adult side, they don't deal with any of this. I think their lives are just so much easier. Another challenge we have, if you think about the prices, if you look at a 300-page book for kids, it's like $17.99 is pretty much our top price. You could charge $25.99 for that book for adults. That is a huge difference for us. Our profit margin is so much lower. Or if you look at a beautiful picture book with incredible art and it's $16.99, that is a very thin profit margin. The adult world doesn't have those considerations, which is why they can somehow, in a way I never grasped, pay $7 million to somebody for their book, I mean, you read these articles, and I always understand, why doesn't this whole company collapse, if you pay $7 million for something? Who's going to ever earn out that advance? That would mean every man, woman, and child in America would have to read this book, But somehow the economics of the adult side work out, I suppose because they charge so much. Anyway, it's just very different. We're just very nickel and dime on our end. And I've always said there's really nice people in my field because the kind of people drawn to it, there's no real money, power, or glamour in children's books, except, of course, Harry Potter did change the equation for money. But it's the kind of person who'd work with elementary school kids. That's who comes into the field. And also, frankly, this is not such a child-centered culture, as you know. I mean, right, we don't even have helpful daycare. We're not encouraging families, right, in this culture, unlike other countries. And that's an interesting challenge, too, about choosing children's books. And people used to say to me, it's like saying to Donna Jo, isn't that nice, or what fun. I had all these friends who went into publishing at the same time. They say, well, when are you going to start doing adult books? Like I would grow up, and there was this lack of respect for it, which I think is still there. It's just the nature of it. But it's sort of like saying, oh, do you want to teach elementary school or do you want to teach college? One is much better than the other. Well, that's, of course that's not true. And one of the really great things about for us, I feel, the reason I love it is the connection between the reader and the book is most profound in childhood. It is never the same again. You can love a book with all your heart as an adult. It can mean a great deal to you. You could read it over and over, but you don't enter the world of the book and believe in it the way you did as a child. You remember that. That is not something you can give to a book once you're more mature. And it's just a more formative period of life, so that what happens in a book is truly, really keenly important. You could read about a culture or people you'd never meet in your real life, but you'll grow up with an interest in them. You may always go to museums to see a show on that particular culture. All your life you read about that culture because you read a book. Or you're interested in civil rights, or you might be a civil rights lawyer because you read a book, about that as an 8-year-old. So I find that really exciting about it. It makes it really meaningful. And another great thing about what we do, which of course is true the adult side, but I could never work as hard at what I do if my product weren't available for free in the library. It is not an elite product. You can get the books without paying for them, and that's pretty rare. I mean, you could get radio or TV, but you can't even get TV for free, particularly these days. So how many people get to work to create a product that you can feel that everyone will have it? So I find that very satisfying about the job.
Jessica brought up the word choose when she was introducing, and that's something I think a lot of people, me too, would like to hear you talk about. How do stories come to your attention? And when you've got this array of stories in front of you, how do you choose which you're going to publish?
Mm-hmm. Well, that's an interesting question, because how stories come to you is fluky in some ways. I mean, today it's mostly through agents, and people send you things, but you're also always hoping you'll find things in other ways. And that's one reason I'm here. I mean, it's all just about, you never know. You never know where there's a great book and you might come your way, and you just have to go out and let people know you're looking. And it's just a ripple effect, and it could land in your desk by luck. But it's also just knowing agents and talking to them, and then going to writers' conferences and talking to people. And I do look at what they call slush, which means over the transom, not agented, and you don't know the person. But I don't get much, and there's not much time for it, and it isn't as fruitful as it used to be, because people do are finding agents more. But a couple of my, best books. I mean, I did a book called The Watsons Go to Birmingham, 1963, which is going to be on Friday. It's going to be a Hallmark Channel film on the Hallmark Channel. Finally, 19 years ago, it was published, and it's finally being a film. But it's in honor of the 50th anniversary of the bombing of the Birmingham church, which was on Sunday, the 15th. So the show's this Friday. Anyway, it's a great book. And it's sort of a classic now. But that I found we had a contest, and it was in the slush of the contest. And the reason I pulled it out, I was screening as a freelance job, was the title. I knew what happened in Birmingham in 1963. As an adult reader, a kid wouldn't know necessarily that meant he was talking about the bombing. But I put it aside because that showed me that's somebody's doing something here. I don't know what. I mean, I had a wall of stuff to get through, but I thought I'm going to look at that later, just because of that title. And that's just how you look like that, through hundreds of things to find something. You don't want anything to get away from you. And then he went on that was a Newbery honor, and then he won the Newbery for Bud Not Buddy. And then When You Reach Me is a book I did a few years ago, which also won the Newbery, by Rebecca Stead. I took a night class in writing adult fiction at the 92nd Street Y in New York, and she and I were in the class together. But it had nothing to do with children's books. I was taking it to get away from my job. We never talked about children's books. And then we had a little writers group afterward, the way you sometimes do that when you find some souls. And then, being New York, we drifted apart. The group broke up. And then a few years later, she called me up and said, I have a manuscript. It wasn't When You Reach Me. It was her first book, and we worked on it for a couple of years. But there you never know where you might meet somebody. It's so there's a path. But what makes me want something is it's as basic as you guys. I mean, it makes me keep reading. That is huge. And I always feel, our audience is so challenging. To get children to read is tough, as you know. I sort of feel my basic job is to get a kid in Tulsa to turn the page. That is all I do, in the editorial process, is to keep the story, help the author make the story go well, and people don't fall out of the dream of it. They don't pull back. They don't doubt. They don't question. They just stay. They want to keep reading. They want to know what happens. It's very basic stuff. It's like common sense. Yet, I just find I'm a good stand-in, and Editor's Day is a good stand-in for a kid's life with all the distractions. And, I read stuff. You get so much stuff. I read stuff, on the subway leaning against a pole. I read like at the doctor, we're in my little paper dress sitting on the cold table, waiting 45 minutes. I will read a manuscript. And you feel sorry for people because, of course, when they wrote their book, they did not dream that it would be read like that. But that's fair. If I fall into the story under those conditions, that's really a huge thing. I might buy it. And I've sat beside people in the hospital and forgotten I was in a hospital because the story was so good, or I've been on a long, stinky bus trip to Vermont and forgotten I was on a stinky bus. So that's all it is. It's just to tell me a story. And that goes to this term called voice. Voice is kind of the personality of the book, or the authority, the storytelling authority too. And that is just everything. If somebody is a storyteller and makes me keep reading, that's a huge thing, because I cannot give anybody a voice. You have to bring that with you. I can help you fix your plot, and all those things, but I can never give anybody a voice. And that is immediately what we're looking for. And it's one of those really, quirky things. Every writer has their personality. And you'll learn to develop it if you're, writing. So it's very simple in the end. I just wanted to know what happened, And then there's secondary things of, can I sell it? Can I publish it well? Can I sell it? Who's going to read it? Who's going to read it? That's a big question. And then you try to think of that, and you think, how much should I pay for it? We do profit and loss statements. How many copies can we get out to, with this advance? So there's lots of numbers, which I don't think people think about at all, the business side and negotiating with agents. And it's very, I'm in the middle of an auction for a book in Australia, so I was up at 12:30 sending a second offer and trying to get a better payout from my business manager, who's emailing me at midnight, and then I check my email at 6:30 to see what they said. It's just like a lot of business stuff about fighting over details, like, how much cash will the company let me put out on signing? It's never something you think about when you think you want to, create children's books. But that's part of it. We have to make money. But luckily not as much as the adult side has to make money.
We are at 12:30, so why don't we open it up to questions? And do we need to pass around?
Yes, just
okay.
for the recording.
Mary's here.
It's in the back.
Hi, thank you. We see ebooks making a dent in the adult book world. How is that impacting children's literature, if at all?
It is, but it's not as intense. It's interesting. It's been a good thing in a way. It's not terrible news that, the adult side, they're losing print, what we call print, meaning the hardcover book, as opposed to ebook sales, but they're balancing. The income is good because, of course, an ebook does not cost anything to produce, physically. But the price, of course, is much lower than the real book. In our zone, it hasn't come in the same impact because, for one thing, children don't have the devices. Little kids, like a middle grade reader, doesn't have a device yet. They don't exist. They're still reading books. If I look at some of my titles, all the books do have some ebook sales, and some of them have quite a lot. But I look at some of them and I think that's really teachers and librarians probably buying them for my middle grades. But YA readers, a lot of kids are reading them on iPhone, which I don't want to do myself. I find that screen so small. But I think a lot of younger people are used to it, and so that's growing. And, of course, then you have the freedom. You get your book, you want a book, you get it right that second. So it's interesting. And, of course, one of the cool things about ebook sales from our point of view is there's a lot more impulse buying, as you're right? Because you think, well, I want to read everything by so-and-so, and then you just, whereas you wouldn't buy that many books in the store physically, you'd stop. I've done it too, right? You just stick it on your Kindle or whatever. So it's not, I think there's still, especially picture books. Picture books can be really cool on iPads. I don't know if you've seen any. They're fantastic. Like you might have for very young children, you'll have, the Cat in the Hat, and they'll say cat, and then you touch cat, and it says cat, and it spells cat. All this cool stuff.
And some of them meow.
Oh, it's just amazing. Or they'll say, put the hat on the cat. You can take your finger. So this is really exciting for small children. and in terms of learning, reading, but on another level, with a different kind of picture book, a little more sophisticated, there's still a great love for the actual book, and there's sort of the drama of the page turn. There is a whole brilliance to doing that right. It's like a movie, or, how do you tell a story visually? And then there's the pleasure for children, the connection between adults and children to read together. That's a really big part of it. And then the physical love a child has for a book, when they really are attached. They want that book every night before they go to sleep, or they take the book with them. So there's all those factors that are still good, keeping that connection with the hard copy. I don't know if that will change.
I wonder if you could comment on the core curriculum and the effect that it's having on books. And specifically, it seems like the core curriculum wants to produce understanding out of the content of the book itself. Mm-hmm. And is this going to drive editors like yourself to do more nonfiction, or is the concept that, for instance, I've written a middle grade novel with a lot of physics in it, and so does fiction with fact count, or is there going to be a movement toward more nonfiction as a result of the emphasis on the core curriculum?
Both. Did we understand core curriculum? It's even hard for me to explain it, frankly. It's a new movement in literacy, and where they're using books more. So it means, there's more interest in nonfiction, which is great, because good nonfiction can be as exciting as fiction. You can tell, if you tell it well, it's so gripping. And then, yes, anything with special content, like a book where physics plays a role, that's a great thing. And I think it's all very positive. And it's interesting because Donna Jo's a good example, because she's done a lot of historical fiction, and she does amazing research. Like she's done, she can do research in Italy in the archives, she does primary research on a book set in Venice in the 16th century or in Naples at 1900. She can read old newspapers. And so she will talk about that in her afterword. Or we were just talking about a book she wants to write about a child trying to survive, an Italian child set adrift in Japan during World War II. And also what happens when the bomb is dropped on Hiroshima. And there's certain things that you can put in the story, but you can put a whole lot more in the afterword. And that is always, and her afterwards are particularly interesting because she has so much more to say that isn't appropriate for the story.
There is there are various publishing houses that are kind of dedicating themselves to that sort of work now. Charles Bridge is what I think of first.
It's smart. I mean, in that there's, that's a library school market. Oh, that's another thing about children's books. This is different from adult books in that we've always had a bigger library school market than the adult side. Retail or trade is, in the store or Amazon. And then the other side is libraries and schools buying. And it used to be like 80% of our market back in the good old days of the 60s and 70s when there was a lot of government money. And there's not at all the government money anymore for schools buying up whole classroom sets of things. But it's still a bigger portion of us, our sales go to that market. And that, so the Common Core is great because the more content you have that a teacher can use, the more likely you are to get that sale.
Providing an English teacher can teach physics.
Well, no, it's really providing that your book is so brilliant that you embed complex ideas in a dramatic way that any reader can grasp. It's not the teacher's job, it's the writer's job, right?
Excellent.
And it's like A Wrinkle in Time, right? I mean, I took physics in college because of that book, and I did really badly, because physics was really hard and I didn't, it wasn't about time travel. How many people have read A Wrinkle in Time? Isn't that amazing? You read about,
That was my point. See?
Yes. But there you see is a very creative approach to physics, right? And who knows, maybe some people studied physics And we're good at it because of that book.
Hi.
Hi.
So I grew up in Trinidad in the Caribbean, and I've written a children's story. It's a picture book manuscript, and it's about a little girl who uses bush medicine to cure her grandmother, and it has a lot of Creole words in it. So I'm just wondering, do you think there's a market for Caribbean picture books here in the
Oh yeah,
States?
there are books set in that culture, and that's an interesting question. It's like your question about physics, your question about Creole. There are ways, to put that foreign idea in the text, in context, so that you understand. And of course, if it's a picture book, you will get a little help, in that maybe the grandmother or somebody will be cooking a food in a pot, and there'll be a name for the pot, and maybe then the reader sees the action, and they gather that the pot's name is whatever the Creole term is. In a novel, of course, you don't have that help. You only have context. So there's always room for that kind of book, and we actually need more and more of them, right? Because that's one of the big issues right now. I'm on this committee in Children's Book Council, which represents publishers. It's the diversity committee, and we have these issues about publishing more diverse books, but also we've got to have staffing that is more diverse, because the future of America is not white, but publishing is a very white business. The problem has always been the salary is so low, and it's always actually been a little lower than your tuition. It's just an underpaid profession, and that's a challenge, because people whose families may have sacrificed to send them to college, they are not going to encourage their child to go into a low-paying profession. And I don't know what we're going to do about this, but it's certainly, we're trying to get young people to want to come into the business.
I want to talk just 1 second, though, about other words from other languages in your story in English, because I do that a lot. And I have learned a few things, sometimes the hard way. Every time you have a word that's in another language in a novel, you really do need to just instantly give the English word after it. It can be in single quotes, it can be in double quotes, or it can just have a dash on either side of it. It's like it's almost invisible. People really don't mind it, and then they know what that word meant, and they go on with it. But the big thing that I've learned is when you give your characters names, obviously the names have to be appropriate to the culture, but teachers want to be able to pronounce the children's names, and they want to be able to pronounce it properly. They don't want to sound like a dumb thing to their students. So pick the names carefully, so that it's sort of, from looking at it, it's sort of like if they used English rules of reading, it would come out sort of like it is in the other language. Learn from me.
We're talking about, you don't want anybody to ever fall out of the fictive dream of your book. You don't want a term to come up where you stop and think about it. Like, that's why Donna Jo's put it in and they keep reading. Just make sure that people understand.
Hi. So you said that our culture isn't very child-centered, and I was wondering if you think that has any effect on the kind of stories that people like to tell children, especially like what they bring to be published, or just the things that people will allow to be published, and if you would like to see that change, or just things that you don't see a lot that you like to see.
What a great question. I don't think I've ever heard that question. And you should answer that too. Well, that's interesting. I wasn't thinking. I think our culture has always cared deep. Those of us who read and care about storytelling, I've always wanted to tell wonderful stories to our children, and children demand them because, again, children are training us because their attention span is so limited. They won't put up with anything crappy, So there's a quality control happening naturally, I think, but. Because our culture, it's interesting. I don't see it manifested so much in in literature. What bothers me in our culture is, that teachers aren't paid enough, that the teacher's profession is not respected enough, especially elementary school. The people who choose to work with young children really aren't respected in the same way in other countries, I think. That does filter down to us. But I do think so many wonderful teachers and parents and librarians care deeply about what their children read. I have to really think about your question. That's an excellent question.
One of the things that I feel like childhood is full of frustration. There is so much that you do understand, but you are not physically or otherwise able to deal with. You just can't reach that thing. It's there, and you're here. And also, there are so many things that happen that feel arbitrary to you. There is so little, your rights are very limited. Even parents who buy things for you, there's a whole bunch of other things where you're not allowed to talk that way, you're not allowed to dress that way, you're sort of not allowed to think that way. I'm very concerned about children's rights, and I relish books that deal with those things in children's lives. So, and some of them deal with it in a way that publishers and parents can manage, and they can all laugh at it, but really it's real, and I so much appreciate that. The class that I'm teaching, we read this little book, Don't Let the Pigeon Drive the Bus. Okay, so there's a pigeon, and somebody's leaving and saying, hey, while I'm gone, don't let that pigeon drive the bus. Now, why would a pigeon want to drive a bus, But that's how children are. They'll want to do all sorts of things that they're not capable of doing. And it is just so frustrating that everybody's stopping you, and nobody will ever explain to you why. They just stop you. And finally, it's over. The bus is gone, and then a truck comes up, and you want to drive that. But that book has done very well. Because I think people laugh at it. But it's about something real and basic in childhood that you're constantly being told you can't do things, and nobody ever tries to explain to you why. Because you'll understand when you get older. Well, you aren't older. It's now. And there are so many things that happen to children that we wish did not happen to children, and therefore we won't talk about them. My nephew got killed when he was 34, and his son was was 7 and something, and his wife was very pregnant, and she kind of fell through the floor, and so she sent her son to come live with us for that summer till she kind of pulled herself together. And while he was with us, I could not find any books to read to him about your father dying. Books about your grandparents, books about your dogs, your turtle, and books that were abstract. The leaves falling off the trees, the chair is now empty. But not books about he's not here anymore, and what does it mean for him to be dead? And you need to actually face it. And there are so many children who face losing a parent or a sibling, and we just don't meet it because we think it's not... The teacher's not going to put it in her classroom. She thinks it'll scare the other kids. Maybe their daddy will die. The librarian might buy it, but put it on a special shelf, only to be used if the psychologist or whatever comes and grabs it for that kid. As though not every kid is afraid. Every kid is afraid that somebody that they love is going to die. As soon as you learn about death, you're afraid that people around you are going to die. It's helpful to you to read that some kid's daddy died, And the kids still went on, and the mother was still there, and the other people were still gathering around. It's very important that we face what children really are facing and that we deal with it, whether we deal with it funny so that adults can swallow it, or whether we deal with it direct. I mean, I went ahead and I wrote a book, and I found a publisher who would publish it, but it's only found in psychologists' offices. You know, it's not in library shelves. Parents, teachers, whatever, they're afraid it'll scare
that goes
kids.
back to that question of when is a child right for this book, and how it's this ongoing discussion. And you know, adults are very protective in ways that kids don't necessarily need. You know. I think kids are much tougher than adults realize. Adults forget. Some adults forget about being children.
What's the title of that?
It's called Flamingo Dream, and it got very good reviews. But review after review, one reviewer said it was a hanky book. She just cried through the whole book. My nephew's son needed that book.
I wanted to follow up a little bit. You just talked about kids being ready for books. And like Donna Jo, I'm really lucky enough to be both a writer and a teacher here. And one question that I get asked a lot is, who is this book appropriate for? And I find that I have to give a very different answer as a writer of young adult, as a teacher. I think that people are curious about not just censorship, but how about this? I've been asked often how the age is determined on a book when it says good for this age, but I'm going to use Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian as an example. I might give that book, I recommend that book to anyone 9 to 90 as being just a wonderful book to read. But I'm sure you know the whole kerfuffle around Sherman Alexie and the response that he had to give.
Book, yeah.
So if you could just talk for a minute as an editor, I would love to have an editor's response as to just trying to put an age on a book.
That's really tricky because we discuss this all the time. We've actually taken ages off the flaps, but because we don't like it. But on the other hand, a bookstore wants them, because the children's department of a bookstore is the most challenging department to service. To be the person in charge of it, you need more training than the adult side, because you get a customer coming in who says, I need a book for a 10-year-old boy. You don't know what to do. You know, it's the department where the clerk or whoever plays a much bigger role in what gets sold. Unlike you go to the library, of course the librarian is trained to know exactly, to help you get that book. So the one thing they want is ages on the books, because a parent may not wander in, there's no one to help them, like Barnes & Noble, and they need to pick it out themselves, so they're looking for that age. But we feel, really hampered by it. And so we go back and forth between putting them on and taking them off. And also, they do reading levels, which is about, how well do you read. And they do these crazy things where they give a book a really high reading level that's, a very simple story for second graders, but it might have one tricky word in it, like phosphorescence or something. And they say it's 8th grade. I mean, so all of this is hard because it's always about when is it, 6-year-olds were reading Harry Potter, which is a little crazy, right? Because one thing that happens in our field is that if you do need to be ready emotionally for the story, and a child's not going to enjoy a story that's too young or too old for them. But that is always a tricky one. I mean, like I said, we have these rough, 8 to 12, and why is it middle grade? Why is it, one thing about that question from the adult department saying, is this YA or adult? And my criteria, when I thought about it, I thought, I think I could say it's a young adult book versus adult. It has to do with the writer's assumption of patience on the part of the reader. For young adult, they're not a patient reader. you could take so much more time in an adult story to start this book, you can have mom look, and if you have a book where mom's looking out the window, think about her marriage, that's not for YA, right? And also adolescence, the story has to be at a very high pitch emotionally, because that's where kids are living. That's what that time of life is. It's very intense emotionally. And the story has to start. You have a big responsibility as the storyteller to have that authority of telling the story intensely so people enter it fast and bond with the main character. Adults just get to spend it's so funny. I think I've been kind of ruined as an adult reader by my years in this field, because I often read something that's gotten great reviews and I go, well, do your job. The writer is just not getting this story started, But anyway, one thing we do put on books, the only label we have right now is 14 and up, which is this way of trying to say this as like intense content. Sex, drugs, violence, abuse, I don't know, whatever really tough, mature content, it's a 14 and up. But that's really pretty minor, and I don't know, we'll probably keep revising these and revising them. Sorry about that. Because again, think about all the kids and how different they are. And they're like all 9 years old, but how do we label the book?
Should we? So many questions after questions.
Well, in some ways I don't want, one reason we put 14 and up, I don't want a 9-year-old to read that book. I really don't want an adult to put that in the kid's hand, and I hope they don't read it on their own, ideally. We're trying not to have that happen. That's hard.
So do you think that booksellers have a responsibility not to put Twilight, I'm just pointing out now, mature content in with the book when you reach it?
Well,
Or is that someone's responsibility?
I suppose so. If a store has a role in a community where people trust their taste and judgment, but that's hard to know. And also somebody could pick up Twilight and put it on the shelf with When You Reach Me during the day, and then the bookseller won't have spotted that. So there it is, and maybe a young person will come along and take it. But then they do get to the register, and I hope that at that point the person at the register will talk to the child about the book and think, well, I don't know. That's a really good question. Yeah, no, you're writing for that age. One thing Donna Jo was talking about too, is thinking about children. See how there's a talent of seeing from a child's point of view, and clearly Donna Jo has it. It's a very rare talent. And one thing I think is interesting about stories for kids is the children basically live in a cage of adult control. And that's why so many really satisfying books there's no parents. They're either orphans. Everybody's parents are always archaeologists. How many archaeologists do you know? I mean, come on. But they always go away for the summer. You go to stay with your uncle. He doesn't pay any attention. You find a cave. You solve a mystery, right? Or there's Victorian novels where father worked at the bank, mother lay on a couch upstairs, or else she was dead. The servants were lazy. So you found a magic carpet, you had an adventure. It's the whole message is, and like Harry Potter, the orphan, you have to get rid of the parents to have an adventure. And the most satisfying stories are where children have power, because they don't have power in real life, and they're like little animals wanting power, like all of us, we want power. But they really, as Donna Jo was talking about, they're powerless. And so that's why these stories are so satisfying, where there's magic. Or you find out you're the prince of something or other, or you're the one meant to rescue the world. Because in real life, no, that's just not your life. And so that's why you find that it's in a timeless theme. And that whole archaeologist parents, this always cracks me up. Yeah. Or like Nancy Drew. Did anybody read those? Remember that? There was no mom, So.
Is there any self-publishing in children's books?
Just as it's happening all over. I'm not aware yet of the quality of it.
It's hard to know.
Yeah. But it's certainly an avenue. Then I can understand that it's a good avenue for some people when they really believe in what they've got. Because it's really hard, if the market doesn't, if people feel they can't sell your book, they shouldn't publish it. But it doesn't mean you can't publish it, and maybe you can sell it. So there's plenty of people doing well.
I think we have time for one more question.
Hi, I just wanted to say first, Ms. Napoli, you came to my middle school when I was in 6th grade, and that was like the moment I decided I wanted to be in book publishing, so thank you so much.
Nice, thank you.
But I'm trying to get a publishing internship this spring because that's what I want to do for a career. And I was wondering if either of you had any advice for getting an internship.
What year are you?
I'm a sophomore.
So you'll be a Random House has internships, but you can't get one until the summer before senior year because they want somebody, I guess, who could get a job pretty soon if you're great. That's just my house. Mm-hmm. If you just go on all the publishers' websites and just look it up, you could probably find a way to learn about how to apply to their programs. Then they all have different policies. So that's a great idea. And you might even find something here. It's a small place. So there's probably some local things you could do too. No, anything else? No? Thank you so much. This is really great. Thank you.